When I first saw trailers for DioField, I didn't really know how to feel about it yet. I dug the art style, I thought that looked great, but the bits and pieces we were seeing of gameplay was something where I could see the lineage from other games in Square Enix's past, but it was also something that was definitely different and more experimental. And now that I've actually had the time to play the game and finish it, sit on my thoughts and think about it for a little bit, overall, I really like it and enjoy my time with it, but it is one of those situations where it's an experimental title, and because of that, it's just a little rough around the edges in a few ways where, with certain tweaks and certain updates, and maybe even something that could be an eventual second game in the same style, could be something really incredible. Not that this game isn't good, but there's potential here for something even better that I would love to see happen someday. I do want to take a quick second to thank Square Enix for supplying the early review code for this game. It is available on Xbox, PS4, PS5, Switch, as well as Steam. All of my experiences with the game, as well as the gameplay footage you're seeing here, is based on the Switch version. So let's talk about it. To begin with, the basic pitch, if you haven't really looked at this game before, this is a strategy RPG, but instead of being a turn-based one or one that relies on grid movement, it is real-time with full motion for all the characters, and really in practice feels a lot less like tactical RPGs like Final Fantasy Tactics, and more like isometric party RPGs like, say, Baldur's Gate. The rhythm and flow is a little different. You can see what it's inherited from past Square Enix titles, but it has a lot in common with this isometric party approach where you have your main group of 4 characters that you control, you're moving them around in real time, and positioning is really key to how battles work alongside using special moves. The scale is larger because it is more focused on that larger strategy battle rather than the smaller skirmishes of a pause and play RPG, but it does handle very similarly. The flow of the game is really simple. You occasionally watch some cutscenes. There is a main base you have where you can upgrade your units, buy new weapons and armor, talk to people to get a little more character development out of some of them, and then proceed to one of the game's various battles, either main quests that advance the story, or the occasional sub-battle that is there to either flesh out a side character a little bit more, or give you an opportunity to just get more resources and items to power up your team for the next fight. One of the interesting things about the shift to real-time combat is that battles compared to other strategy RPGs are actually really fast. Unless you're really taking the time to micromanage every single action, or you're very hesitant about doing some of your attacks, most battles take at most 10 minutes to finish, some of them even as fast as 5, especially when you make use of the game's fast forward mechanic during times that you don't have to micromanage your units as much. Personally, I view this as a huge benefit because it never feels like a single battle is like a big thing I have to make sure I put aside time for. It's really easy to just do a couple battles back to back if you want to put only a little bit of time here and there in the game, or if you do want to just blitz through as much of it as you can, like I did this past weekend. It all flows together really well. Visually, I love the game's art style. The battle maps have kind of diorama feeling to them, where you're actually playing with little miniatures and moving them across the board to fight enemies, giving it an almost tabletop RPG vibe. The art that goes into characters' portraits is beautiful. The actual up-close models that you'll see for when walking around the base or during certain cutscenes have a little bit more of a doll-like aesthetic to them. I think overall it's just a very good-looking game that, while it doesn't necessarily have the most impressive graphics for some scenes, the style really does make up for it in a lot of places. Now, being the Switch version of a game that is multi-platform, one of the considerations and things that I know people can be worried about is how the performance stacks up against others, and it is a little give and take. When it matters, the frame rate is really stable. In actual battles, when you're moving units around and actually doing things where you don't want stuff to slow down that might mess up your inputs or timing, all of it works fine. However, when you're seeing some of the more up-close models of characters, like when you're walking around the base, seeing certain cutscenes, or characters are using particularly fancy-looking moves, there are some frame drops that can occur, and in some cases are pretty extreme. Again, this never happens in a time where it's going to impact your gameplay, but it is a thing that is a little visually glaring on occasion. I did play the majority of the game in docked mode, but I did some handheld gameplay as well, and I will say handheld mode seems to be the one that's optimized a little bit better. You're still going to be seeing those frame drops during those particularly intense scenes, but they are a little less abrasive than what docked mode can look like. The game's music complements the visual style really well and absolutely fits that kind of strategy RPG vibe. And the voice acting, in my experience, is at least really great. I did play most of the game in Japanese with subtitles, but I did mess around a little bit in English just to see how they sounded, and I actually really liked the delivery, and now I think I want to tackle another playthrough in English just to kind of see how those deliveries are across. The little bits I've sampled, though, a lot better than I expected them to be. The game's storytelling is one of the aspects that, in my mind, is a little bit of a give and take depending on what exactly you're into. to. It's a very detached kind of tone. While there is a party of characters that you'll build up over time, and you do get a bit of screen time with each of them to flesh out their personalities, very few of them are really given enough time outside of the main core cast to really get you any kind of attached feeling to them. And the story itself is one that is really interesting in how it's paced. For the most part, it feels very reactive over time. You're kind of just going from one battle to the next, and while there is a through line connecting them of your party of characters, you don't really get a full sense for what story is being told until really near the very end of the game. And I will say that it does tie together very well and go some places that I really didn't expect it to, and pays off a lot in the end. But it does take a while to get there. You're going to be going through a lot of early skirmishes and a lot of the story in the battle just kind of going from place to place. And while there are some interesting set pieces and moments, it just never really feels that cohesive until its closing moments. As for the strategy gameplay, there's a lot of cool ideas going on here, and the stuff that works really well. There's just a couple other little aspects of it that I think don't necessarily gel with the rest of the system that just hold it back a tiny bit, particularly if your main interest is in challenging strategic gameplay. Across the game's 7 chapters, you recruit up to 20 characters that are split across 4 different broad character types. Soldiers, which are the frontline footmen, they're usually the tankiest characters aside from the main character who is a soldier but really plays more like a high DPS assassin. Cavalry, which are mounted characters whose biggest strength is their high mobility, so they can quickly get to different places across the map when it matters. Ranged characters that stay far back and usually have more kind of offensive support and debuff roles. And finally, magic users that can buff and heal the other characters while also dishing out some major damage with big AoEs. One of my absolute favorite things about this game is how the abilities of these different class types can synergize together. For instance, using a Wyvern's ability to round up a bunch of enemies and put them in a single spot together so that you can use some of your other party's small-scale, high-damage AoEs to hit them all at once. Or inflicting an enemy with a negative status effect, so the main character's assassination move, which is already a high damage single target move, deals even more damage, allowing you to quickly take out some high priority targets. While there are a total of 20 different characters you can work with, you're only going to be bringing 4 as your actual main party into battle, and each of those characters will have an assisting character that gives them access to their activatable moves. This gives a little more variation to their moveset and can open up a little versatility so that, the healer can also provide a long-range debuff if need be, or you can have a frontline tank have access to a healing spell. The versatility here is really cool, and the number of different ways you can build your party is great. The only thing that kind of hampers this a little bit, though, is the game's leveling system. Because only the main active people in combat are the ones that actually get full XP, and the rate at which levels increase for enemies in the game go, you end up being awkwardly encouraged to just kind of pick your 4 favorite and go. There's not any kind of catch-up mechanic where, underleveled characters can quickly level up to catch up to the rest. That isn't how it works. The only option you're really given is that you can replay older battles with those characters and just grind them back up to the same power level as everyone else, which, yeah, that does give the option to have a little bit more flexibility and swap between characters, but it just is done in a very grindy way that feels unnecessary and kind of punishes you for wanting to mix and match characters a little bit across the game. Also, if your interest in a strategy RPG is actually needing to use really advanced tactics to handle situations, you're going to want to play this game on hard, because on normal difficulty, it's pretty forgiving. You can use more advanced tactics to handle a lot of situations, but a lot of the ways that the damage mechanics work out and options that characters have, you can basically brute force your way through a lot of encounters with little difficulty. There's a couple situations that might come up where you need to use a little more planning and strategy, but at the end of the day, you can basically approach most situations by just keeping your characters grouped together and blast AoEs at everything till enemies stop moving. On hard, enemies will be sufficiently tougher enough that you actually do have to put a little more thought and planning into where you want to position characters and actually rely a little more on some of the advanced tactics that the game really gives you a lot of tools and options for that just don't feel necessary on the regular difficulty. Something related to this that I admit is a little nitpicky, but I do think is a really cool missed opportunity, is the game's New Game Plus mode, where you're able to start up a new playthrough with your characters being the level they were at the end of your first playthrough. You have all the items and things to bring on right away in order to tackle the exact same battle, so you're just going to be bulldozing through level 3 enemies using a super powerful late game party. I think it would have been really cool if New Game Plus didn't necessarily redo battles to where there's more enemies and more of a challenge, but at least had enemies auto-scaled to the level of your characters so that you had new challenges to confront with all the tools that you got and amassed through your first playthrough. What's also really weird about this too is that it's an actual built-in mechanic in the game that you can replay all of the game's past missions at any given time, which basically fulfills the same role that New Game Plus does, except I guess for the fact that New Game Plus does also allow you to get more materials, so you can unlock even more stuff for this playthrough where you're extremely more powerful than anything you'll be facing until the final chapter again. Which, on that note, one thing I do really want to praise about the game, though, is how much it allows you to kind of reflect back on all the content you play through. You not only have the ability to play through any old chapters or maps that you already completed, but the game also has a library function where you can not only do things like look up character profiles, but it even gives you the ability to replay all of the cutscenes, like all of them. The opening ones in between battles, different things that are happening during important battles. It gives the ability to reflect or rewatch stuff whenever you want, which is a feature I really wished more games of this style had. That was one of my biggest complaints about Triangle Strategy, and so I'm really happy to see it here. If your main interest is just picking your favorite characters and making your way through all of the battles, most of the problems that I have with the mechanics in the system aren't gonna apply to you. As long as you stick with your core group, keep them leveled up, equip them with the best gear you have available, you're gonna be able to handle all the battles just fine and have a good time getting through the story, which I again think is done really well. If your main interest is in the strategy aspects themselves and you want to be challenged and you want to be able to experiment and try other things, while that is something that you can do in this game, it just feels like some of the design choices are really working against that aspect of it. This is one of those situations where this game is ultimately a first attempt, and one that I think is a good one, and I really hope that it's channeled into an even better next game. Not necessarily a DioField 2, it doesn't have to be a direct sequel like that, but if Square Enix is going to invest in making more games of this style, I think there's potentially something really cool here with the right adjustments and updates and lessons learned from this one. When it comes to getting access to games like this a little early and it's through the form of a review code, I feel like one of the best ways to exemplify how I feel about a game is whether or not I plan on picking it up again physically to have the copy around or to play it on another system. And I will say that I do plan to do that with this game. I played it on the Switch, I had a good time there, I enjoyed it, and I do plan on grabbing a physical version of PS5 to have and keep and hold on to. I do recommend checking it out. Just know that this is definitely not one of those situations where it's a game that's going to absolutely blow your mind, be a 10 out of 10 first experience. It is something that is rough around the edges, and I think it's a good start to a style of game that I hope we see more of that grow in the right direction. Those are my thoughts on DioField Chronicle. If you're interested in grabbing a copy for yourself, I do have links down below in the description. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button to let me know. If you didn't for whatever reason, hit thumbs down as well. It's good for me to know. If you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that, as well as clicking that bell icon to make sure you get notifications, and I will see you guys later.